In a village forgotten by time lived a man named Karim, whose heart had turned to stone. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when he smiled and embraced his wife Amina with tenderness. But something broke inside him the day his first daughter was born, and then the second, and then the third. 4 more times the scene would repeat. A baby's cry, the midwife's voice saying, "It's a girl," and Karim's face transforming into a mask of rage. 8 daughters in total. 8 disappointments, according to him. 8 reasons to raise his hand against Amina, each time fate denied him the son he so desperately desired. Amina learned to recognize the sounds of approaching violence. The door slamming, heavy footsteps, the thick silence before the storm. She learned to protect her belly when she was pregnant and to protect her daughters when she wasn't. The girls grew up hearing their mother's screams, seeing how their father looked at them with contempt, feeling that their existence was a mistake they had to compensate for by working without rest. The eldest, Layla, was barely 12 years old, but her hands were weathered like those of a 40-year-old woman. The others followed her in line, each carrying responsibilities that didn't correspond to their age. The village knew the situation, but no one intervened. In those places, what happens inside a house is sacred, even though within those sacred walls the worst injustices are committed. Some women murmured in the market. Some men shook their heads in disapproval, but no one did anything. Karim was respected because he had land, because his voice was strong, because men like him always find a way to be respected, even though they don't deserve it. Amina never thought about leaving. Where could a woman with 8 daughters go in a place where women alone don't survive? Besides, in the depths of her battered heart, she still held on to the hope that Karim would change. She prayed every night, not for herself but for her daughters, that someday their father would look at them with love instead of reproach. But the years passed, and the situation worsened. Karim began to drink. He began to disappear for days at a time. When he returned, the violence was worse. Then Amina became pregnant for the 9th time. She was 42 years old, and her body was exhausted. The village doctor warned her that it was a high-risk pregnancy, that she needed to rest. But rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. The older daughters worked in the field, the middle ones took care of the younger ones, and Amina continued cooking, cleaning, carrying water from the well, even though her belly grew and her back screamed in pain. Karim, upon learning of the pregnancy, said something that froze everyone's blood in the house. He gathered the family one night and spoke with a coldness that was worse than his shouting. "This is the last chance. If another girl is born, I'll leave and you'll never see me again. You'll live alone, without my protection, without my name. We'll see how you survive." The youngest girls began to cry. The oldest clenched their fists. Amina only lowered her head, feeling the weight of a threat she knew he would fulfill. The months of that pregnancy were the darkest. Amina developed complications, bleeding that frightened her, pains that doubled her over. The daughters took turns caring for her, sacrificing their own rest. Layla, the eldest, stopped going to school definitively to take care of the house. No one asked her to. She simply did it because someone had to. If this story is touching your heart, stay, because what's coming will change the way you see things. And if you want more stories that make you reflect on life, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any. One night, when Amina was in her 7th month of pregnancy, the pain became unbearable. It wasn't labor pain, but something different, something terrifying. The girls ran to fetch the doctor, but he lived far away, and the night was dark. Karim wasn't home, as usual. Layla took charge. She boiled water, prepared clean sheets, held her mother's hand while she screamed. The younger sisters prayed in a corner, terrified. The doctor arrived 2 hours later. His serious face told them everything they needed to know before he opened his mouth. "The situation is grave," he said. The baby is in the wrong position, and your mother has lost a lot of blood. She needs to go to the city hospital immediately." But the city was 3 hours away by vehicle, which they didn't have. The doctor went to find help while the girls stayed by their mother, watching her grow paler with each passing minute. Amina, in a moment of lucidity between the pain, called her daughters. She gathered them around her bed and spoke to them in a voice so weak they had to lean in to hear her. "Listen carefully," she said. "If I don't survive this night, promise me you'll take care of each other. Don't let anyone separate you. You're all you have in this world. Your father is lost, but you have something he'll never have. You have true love among yourselves. That will make you stronger than any man." The girls cried and told her not to talk like that she was going to be fine. But Amina continued, "And if the baby survives, take care of it too. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or girl. It will be your brother or sister and will need you. Don't repeat your father's mistakes. Don't teach it to despise anyone." Layla, through tears, promised she would take care of everyone. The others nodded, forming a circle around that bed where their mother fought for her life. Finally, a truck arrived. The doctor had gotten a neighbor to take them. They carefully lifted Amina in, and the older girls went with her. Karim still hadn't appeared. Throughout the journey to the hospital, Amina drifted in and out of consciousness. In her lucid moments, she only repeated one thing: "Take care of the baby. Take care of the baby." The girls clung to those words like a lifeline. At the hospital, the doctors acted quickly. An emergency cesarean was necessary. The complications were severe. They explained to Layla, who at 12 years old had to sign papers as if she were an adult, that there was a possibility her mother wouldn't survive the surgery. Layla signed with a trembling hand, praying every prayer she knew. The operation lasted 3 hours. 3 hours in which the sisters hugged each other in the waiting room, imagining the worst scenario. Other families looked at them with pity. A nurse brought them hot tea that none of them touched. Time moved like thick honey. Then the doctor came out. His expression was unreadable. The girls jumped to their feet, hearts in their throats. "Your mother is alive," the doctor said, and they all exhaled the air they'd been holding. "She's very weak and will take time to recover, but she's alive. And the baby is alive too." There was a moment of silence. Then the inevitable question: "Is it a boy or girl?" The doctor smiled slightly. "It's a girl, a small but strong girl. Against all odds, she's breathing well." The sisters didn't know what to feel. Relief that their mother and the baby were alive. Terror about what Karim would do when he found out. They had been through so much fear that night that they had no tears left. They were able to see their mother an hour later. Amina was pale, with tubes connected to her arms, but her eyes lit up when she saw her daughters. The baby was in an incubator nearby. She was tiny, with wisps of black hair and closed fists. "We'll call her Noor," Amina whispered. "Light, because she has brought light in the darkest night." The girls nodded, though in their hearts they knew the true darkness hadn't arrived yet. Karim finally appeared the next day. He didn't ask about his wife first. His first words were, "What was it?" Layla, who had aged 10 years in one night, looked him directly in the eyes and responded, "A girl. Mom almost died bringing her into the world, but both are alive. That's all that should matter." Karim's expression was like watching a building collapse. First anger, then disbelief, then something that could have been pain but quickly transformed into cold resentment. He didn't shout. He didn't hit anything. He simply turned around and left. The girls didn't see him for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, something changed in that family. Without Karim's threatening presence, the house breathed differently. The girls worked together with an efficiency that surprised the neighbors. Layla organized everything like a general. Schedules to care for Mom, shifts to attend to baby Noor, field and house tasks distributed according to each one's capabilities. The neighbor women began to help too, bringing food and baby clothes, offering advice. A network of female solidarity wove itself around that family. Amina recovered slowly. The doctors said it had been a miracle she survived with the amount of blood she had lost. But the real nurses were her daughters, who cared for her with a dedication that melted hearts. They fed her with a spoon, changed her bandages, took turns, so she was never alone. And with Noor, they were equally devoted. The tiny baby became the center of love for everyone. Each sister had her special way of holding her, singing to her, making her smile. When Karim finally returned, the house was in order, better than when he was there. He entered expecting to find chaos and desperation, ammunition to justify his contempt. Instead, he found a home functioning perfectly without him. The food was ready, the house clean, the girls worked in harmony, and in the center of everything, Amina, still weak but alive, holding baby Noor. He said nothing that first night. He sat down to eat in silence while the girls watched him warily. After dinner, he retired to his room. The following weeks were strange. Karim was physically present, but absent in everything else. He didn't help, but didn't hinder either. He didn't talk about leaving, but didn't participate in the family. He was like a ghost inhabiting his own house. The girls got used to his presence-absence. They continued with their routines. Layla remained the pillar, but everyone contributed according to their age. Even the youngest, 6 and 8 years old, helped by setting the table or entertaining Noor when the older ones were busy. Amina, though still weak, directed from her bed, giving instructions in a soft voice, thanking each small gesture from her daughters. Then, something happened that no one expected. One night, Karim was sitting on the porch as he had done every night since his return, smoking in silence. Noor began to cry inside. All the sisters were busy, some finishing field tasks, others preparing dinner. The crying continued. Karim put out his cigarette, stood up, entered the house, and for the first time in his life, took one of his babies in his arms. Noor was so small she fit in his enormous hands. He looked at her, this tiny creature who hadn't asked to be born, who wasn't to blame for not being the son he desired. The baby's eyes opened and looked directly at him. And in that moment, something broke inside Karim. It wasn't an instant transformation. It was more like a crack in a dam that had been holding back too much pressure for years. He rocked the baby awkwardly. He didn't know how to do it correctly. He had never held any of his daughters before. But Noor stopped crying. She stayed looking at him with those immense eyes that babies have, eyes that see people's souls without judging. Layla entered the room and froze upon seeing her father holding her youngest sister. She was going to take her away, fearing he would hurt her, but something in Karim's expression stopped her. "She's so small," Karim said, and his voice sounded different, softer, more human. They were all this small. It wasn't a question, but a realization. Layla nodded slowly. "Yes, Dad. We were all this small, and we all needed you to hold us like this." Karim didn't respond, but didn't let go of the baby either. He sat in a chair, still holding Noor, and something in his posture was different. The other sisters began to enter the room, one by one, drawn by the unusual scene. They all remained silent, watching. No one dared to move or speak, fearing to break whatever was happening. Finally, Karim spoke again. "I've been a terrible man," he said, and the words seemed to cost him physically. "I've hurt your mother. I've hurt all of you. And I don't even know why. Because I wanted a son. As if a son were more valuable than a daughter. As if a person's worth depended on what they have between their legs, instead of what they have in their heart." The girls looked at each other, not knowing how to react. Was this real? Their father, The man who had despised them their whole lives was admitting his mistake. Layla, always the brave one, took a step forward. "Why now, Dad? Why after 9 daughters do you start to see this?" Karim looked at the baby in his arms. "Because I almost lost your mother. Because I saw how all of you worked together to keep this family going when I wasn't there. Because I realized I've been living my life waiting for something that never came, and meanwhile, I lost everything I already had. I've been a fool. A cruel and blind fool." It wasn't tears that ran down his cheeks. It was decades of misunderstood pride dissolving. The daughters didn't run to hug him. Forgiveness doesn't work that way. But something changed in the atmosphere of that room. A small door opened, a possibility of something different. If you're feeling this story is transforming you inside, don't leave yet. And if you want to keep seeing stories that help you understand life better, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any. The following days were cautious. Karim began to get up earlier, helping with tasks he previously considered women's work. He didn't do it well at first. He burned the bread, carried water incorrectly, clumsily tried to help with the baby. The girls watched him with distrust, waiting for him to become the cruel man they knew at any moment. But the days turned into weeks, and the change persisted. One afternoon, while Layla was working in the field, Karim approached her. She tensed her shoulders, preparing for, she didn't know what, but he just stood beside her and began to work in silence. After a while, he spoke. "Your mother told me you left school to take care of the family." Layla didn't respond, didn't know what to say. "That wasn't right," Karim continued. "A 12-year-old girl should be studying, not carrying the weight of an entire family on her shoulders. That was my job, and I failed." Layla stopped working and looked at him. "And now what, Dad? Are some pretty words going to erase years of screaming and hitting? Are they going to erase the times you made Mom cry? The times you told us we were a disappointment?" Her voice broke. "How can I believe you when my whole life you taught me I was worth nothing just because I'm a girl?" Karim received those words like the blows he deserved. "I can't erase the past, Layla. I wish I could. What I can do is try to be different in the future. I know it's not enough. I know you may never forgive me. But I need to try, because you, all of you, deserve a father who values you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be that father, even if it's too late." There was no dramatic reconciliation. There were no hugs or declarations of instant love. But there was a small nod from Layla, an acknowledgement that at least he was trying. And sometimes the attempt is the first step. Months passed. The change in Karim was gradual but constant. He began to spend time with each of his daughters, really getting to know them for the first time. He discovered that the second, Yasmin, had talent for mathematics, that the third, Fatima, could sing beautifully, that the fourth was a natural artist, that the fifth had a sense of humor that could brighten the darkest day. He got to know his daughters as people, not as disappointments. With Amina, it was more difficult. The years of abuse had left deep scars. She watched him with a mixture of cautious hope and residual pain. One night, after the girls fell asleep, he sat next to her bed. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he told her. "I don't know if I could forgive myself if I were in your place. But I want you to know that every day I regret it. Every day I see your face and remember the blows I gave you, the tears I caused, the years I stole, and every day I promise to be better." Amina listened in silence. Then she spoke, her voice firm despite her physical weakness. "Forgiveness isn't something given overnight, Karim. It's earned with actions, not words. Your daughters and I have survived your cruelty. Now you'll have to prove you deserve to be part of this family we built without you." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a possibility, and that was more than Karim deserved. The most notable transformation was seen in how he treated Noor. The baby who had been the straw that broke the camel's back became his redemption. He spent hours with her, singing to her badly, but with love, telling her stories, simply holding her. The older sisters joked that Noor was the spoiled one, but they said it affectionately because they saw that their father's love for the baby was healing something in him. One day, in the village market, an acquaintance said to Karim, "What a shame, 9 daughters and not a single son. It must be hard." Before, Karim would have agreed, perhaps even complained, but that day he looked the man directly in the eye and said, "It's not a shame, it's a blessing. I have 9 extraordinary daughters who are stronger and more valuable than any son I could have had. And if you can't see the value in women, then you're the one who should feel pity, because you're missing out on the most beautiful half of humanity." The man was left speechless. The entire village heard about that conversation. Some murmured that Karim had gone crazy. Others, especially the women, smiled with approval. The change in him didn't go unnoticed. A year passed since that night when they almost lost Amina. The family gathered to celebrate Noor's first birthday. There was modest cake, decorations handmade by the sisters, and for the first time in years, genuine laughter filled the house. Karim looked around at Amina, still fragile but smiling, at his 9 daughters of different ages, each unique and beautiful in her own way. He stood up and raised his cup. "I want to make a toast," he said, "to Noor, who in her first year of life taught me more about love than all my previous years. To Amina, who endured the unendurable and still raised extraordinary daughters. And to my 9 daughters, each of you a gift I didn't know how to appreciate, but now treasure more than my own life. You are my pride, my legacy, my redemption, and I'll spend every day I have left making sure you know it." Tears flowed freely that night, but they were different tears from those of previous years. They were tears of healing, of forgiveness slowly earned, of a family rebuilding itself on the rubble of pain. Not everything was fixed. Scars don't disappear just because someone apologizes. But there was hope, and sometimes that's all you need to move forward. Layla, now 13 years old but with the wisdom of someone much older, watched her father with Noor. She remembered all the times she had wished he would hold her like that, speak to her with that tenderness. Part of her still hurt for what she never had. But another part, the part that was learning to heal, was glad that her younger sisters, especially Noor, knew a different father. It wasn't fair that she had suffered while the younger ones received love. But life is rarely fair. What mattered was breaking the cycle. Years later, when all the daughters had grown up, they would tell this story to their own children. They would talk about the father who was cruel, the near-tragic ending, and the transformation that followed. But the most important thing they would teach is this: a person's worth isn't determined by their gender, their appearance, or others' expectations. It's determined by the love they give, the strength they show, and the capacity to rise after being knocked down. The family was never perfect after that. Karim had moments where his old temper tried to surface, but his daughters, empowered by their new dynamic, didn't allow it. They confronted him, reminded him of his promises, and he, ashamed, corrected himself. It was continuous work, a daily choice to be better. Amina eventually forgave. She didn't forget, but she forgave, because holding on to so much resentment was too heavy to carry. They found a new way to be together, not like they were before, that was impossible to recover, but as something new, something built on honesty and conscious effort. The village that once murmured about the tragedy of the family without sons eventually saw something different. A family of strong women, each contributing to their community in meaningful ways. Layla eventually returned to school and became a teacher. Yasmin an accountant. The others found their own paths, And Noor, the ninth daughter who almost cost her mother's life and triggered her father's transformation, grew up knowing she was loved unconditionally. This isn't a story with a perfect ending because real life doesn't have perfect endings. It's a story about how people can change when they finally see the harm they've caused. It's about the power of a mother's unconditional love and the resilience of daughters who refuse to be defined by their father's rejection. It's about second chances earned with real effort, not just empty words. If you made it this far and this story made you reflect on the value you place on the people in your life, subscribe to the channel to keep seeing stories that change your perspective. Once upon a time, there were two cousins who grew up together in the same village, sharing the same games, the same dusty streets, and the same afternoons under the shade of olive trees. But fate took them down completely different paths. One of them, Salma, married a prosperous merchant who inherited 3 fabric stores in the city. The other, Nadia, fell in love with a humble carpenter who barely had tools to work with. Salma lived in a spacious house with marble courtyards and fountains that sang at noon. Nadia lived in a small dwelling with cracked walls and a roof that leaked when it rained. But what hurt the most wasn't the difference in fortune, but the way Salma treated her cousin. Every time Nadia went to visit her, Salma reminded her how wrong she had been to choose love over security. She would tell her with a cold smile that love didn't put bread on the table, and that sooner or later she would regret having rejected proposals from more well-off men. Nadia endured in silence because she needed the work. Salma had hired her to clean her house, wash her children's clothes, and prepare meals when she received important visitors, but she never paid her in coins. At the end of each workday, Salma would give her leftover food, stale bread, bruised fruit, and tell her that was more than enough for someone who didn't know how to manage her life. Nadia returned home each night with swollen feet and a heavy heart, but she never complained in front of her husband. He worked from dawn until night, carving furniture with his own hands, trying to sell what he could at the market. They had 2 small children who looked at the world with huge, hungry eyes. Each night, before sleeping, Nadia and her husband prayed together, asking for patience, asking for something better, asking that one day their children wouldn't have to go through the same thing. One day, the carpenter couldn't take it anymore. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, and told Nadia that he could no longer bear to see her humiliated. He told her he couldn't keep living off his cousin's crumbs, that he preferred to try something different, even if it meant leaving her alone for a while. Nadia felt afraid, but nodded. She knew her husband was a good man, and that if he made that decision, it was because he truly saw no other way out. The next morning, he prepared a small backpack with some bread, water, and a blanket. He said goodbye to his children with a kiss on the forehead, and to Nadia with a promise. He would return when he had something to offer them. And so, without a clear direction, the carpenter left the village. He walked for hours under the scorching sun, crossed dry fields and dusty paths, until he reached the outskirts of a dense forest that people avoided. They said that travelers got lost in that place, that there were strange creatures, and that the trees seemed to move on their own. But the carpenter wasn't afraid of tales. He was afraid of returning empty-handed. He entered the forest with firm steps, but soon realized the place was more confusing than he imagined. The trees were so tall they barely let sunlight through, and the roots snaked across the ground as if they wanted to trap him. He tried to go back, but all paths looked the same. Night began to fall, and with it came the cold. The carpenter stopped next to a tree, shivering, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. It was then that he heard footsteps. He looked up and saw a small girl, dressed in a dark shawl, running between the trees. He called to her, but she didn't respond. He followed her instinctively, thinking that perhaps she knew the way out. The girl ran fast, as if floating, and the carpenter had to make an effort not to lose sight of her. Finally, She stopped in front of an enormous structure that seemed to have been forgotten by time. It was an old mansion, covered in vines, with broken windows and doors of rotted wood. The carpenter hesitated. Something about that place didn't feel right. But the girl had disappeared inside, and he had nowhere else to go. He pushed the main door, which gave way with a long, eerie creak. Inside, the air smelled of dampness and something else, something he couldn't identify. There was furniture covered in dust, crooked paintings on the walls, and at the back of the hall, a lit fireplace. Over the fire was a large pot, and from it came a delicious aroma of meat stew. The carpenter approached cautiously, and just as he extended his hand to check if it was real, he heard a voice behind him, a soft but firm voice. The girl was there, smiling. She told him her name was Layla and that she lived in that mansion with her grandmother. She explained that it wasn't common to receive visitors and that most people who arrived there did so with bad intentions. But something in the carpenter's eyes told her he was different. Layla invited him to sit, eat, and tell her his story. The carpenter, exhausted and hungry, accepted. While he ate, he told her about his life, about Nadia, about his children, about the constant humiliation, about the poverty that was drowning them. Layla listened in silence, and when he finished, she nodded slowly. She told him she understood his pain and that she wanted to help him. She explained that in that mansion there was a long hallway with 5 doors. Behind the last door, she told him, he would find chests full of silver. He could take what he wanted, but with one condition. He must not open any of the other 4 doors. What was behind them was none of his business, and if he opened them, the consequences would be severe. The carpenter promised to obey. Layla guided him to the hallway, and he walked slowly, feeling his heart beat strongly. The doors were identical, all of dark wood with golden locks. He stopped in front of each one, feeling the temptation to open them, but remembering Layla's words. Finally, he reached the 5th door. He opened it carefully, and what he saw left him breathless. There were chests stacked to the ceiling, all overflowing with silver coins. He took a cloth bag hanging from the wall, filled it halfway, and left the hallway. Layla was waiting for him in the hall. When she saw that he had only taken what was necessary, she smiled. She told him he was a wise man, and that for that reason everything he carried was his by right. She warned him that if he had been greedy, if he had filled the bag to bursting, he wouldn't have been able to leave the mansion. Something would have stopped him. The carpenter thanked her, and Layla accompanied him to the edge of the forest, showing him the way back. Before saying goodbye, she reminded him not to tell anyone about that place, because her grandmother wasn't as understanding as she was, and if someone else arrived with bad intentions, they wouldn't leave alive. The carpenter nodded and walked back to his village with the bag over his shoulder. The next day, he arrived home. Nadia could hardly believe it when she saw him enter with food, new clothes for the children, and enough coins to buy new tools. He told her everything, except the exact location of the place. He told her about Layla, about the warning, and about the doors he shouldn't open. Nadia cried with happiness, and together they began planning their future. Over time, the carpenter opened his own workshop. His furniture was so good that people came from distant towns to buy it. They bought a bigger house, with a garden where the children could play. Nadia stopped working for Salma, and for the first time in years, she felt free. But Salma didn't take long to notice the change. One day she went to visit them, feigning interest, but in reality she was full of envy. She couldn't understand how her cousin, who previously had nothing, now lived better than she did. She insisted on knowing what had happened, but Nadia remained firm and revealed nothing. Salma returned home furious, and that night she demanded her husband investigate. He, tired of her constant complaints, decided to invite the carpenter to dinner. During the evening, Salma was kind, flattering, almost unrecognizable. But when the children went to play, her husband asked the carpenter directly where he had gotten the money from. The carpenter tried to evade the question, but the merchant insisted. And finally, pressured by the hospitality they had shown him, he ended up telling the story. He described the forest, the mansion, the doors, and Layla's warning. Salma listened from the kitchen, memorizing every word. The next morning, without telling anyone, the merchant, dressed in old, torn clothes, took 2 large sacks from his warehouse and headed to the forest. He had decided that if his poor brother-in-law had found silver, he would find something much more valuable. He walked for hours until he found the mansion. Upon seeing it, he felt a mixture of fear and excitement. He pushed the door and entered. Layla was there, waiting for him. She asked who he was and what he was doing in that place. The merchant, with a trembling voice, told her he was a poor man looking for work, that he had gotten lost and needed help. Layla looked at him fixedly, doubting, but finally decided to give him a chance. She explained the same rules. He could go to the hallway, open the 5th door, and take silver. But he must not touch the other 4 doors. The merchant nodded, feigning gratitude, and ran toward the hallway. He opened the 5th door and saw the chests of silver. He filled one of his sacks, but while doing so, he couldn't help thinking about what might be behind the other doors. If there was silver here, he reasoned, in the others there must be something better. Gold, perhaps, or jewels. He left the sack on the floor and opened the 4th door. Inside there were mountains of gold coins, shining and perfect. Without hesitating, he emptied the sack of silver and filled it with gold. But his mind didn't stop there. He opened the 3rd door and found precious stones, rubies, emeralds, sapphires. He emptied the gold and filled the sack with gems. Then he opened the 2nd door and found pearls the size of eggs, perfect and luminous. He exchanged them for the gems. Finally, he reached the 1st door. It was decorated with intricate carvings, and something inside told him that what was there was the most valuable of all. He opened the door with trembling hands, and inside he found enormous sacks piled to the ceiling. He approached one, opened it, and put his hand in. It was wheat, common, ordinary wheat. He froze, confused. Why would they keep wheat in the 1st door, the most decorated one? Before he could think more, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. A deep, furious voice resonated in the hallway. It was Layla's grandmother, and she wasn't happy. The merchant dropped everything and ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, crossed the forest without looking back, stumbling over roots and branches until he finally came out into the clearing. He arrived home at dawn, exhausted, empty-handed, and with bleeding feet. Salma found him lying on the floor, almost unconscious. For days, the merchant was sick, with high fever and pain all over his body. Salma, instead of taking care of him, spent time with the manager of their lands, a young and strong man who did all the work her husband could no longer do. When the merchant could finally get up, he discovered that Salma barely spoke to him. She didn't prepare food for him, didn't ask how he felt. One night, while looking for something to eat in the kitchen, he found all the pots empty. Salma had eaten with the manager and hadn't left him anything. The merchant felt something he had never experienced before: real hunger. And with hunger came understanding. He remembered the 1st door, the wheat, and finally understood. Wheat was the most valuable because without food, nothing else mattered. All the gold, all the jewels, all the pearls in the world were useless if there was no bread to eat. He cried silently that night, repentant of his greed, his cruelty, all the times he had humiliated others, believing himself superior. The next morning, weak and ashamed, he walked to his brother-in-law's house. Nadia opened the door and almost didn't recognize him. He was thin, pale, with dirty and torn clothes. She let him in without questions, prepared him a plate of hot food, and waited for him to eat before speaking. When he finished, the merchant told her everything. He told her about his greed, how he had opened all the doors, how he had lost everything, and how Salma had abandoned him in his most vulnerable moment. Nadia listened in silence, and when he finished, she simply told him he could stay with them until he recovered. She offered him work in her husband's workshop, a place to sleep, and food every day. The merchant couldn't believe it. After everything he had done to them, after years of contempt and humiliation, they were offering him help. He asked her why, and Nadia answered calmly that she didn't believe in returning evil with more evil, that they had learned that life rewards kindness, and that punishing someone who was already suffering wouldn't make them better people. When the carpenter returned from the market that afternoon and saw his brother-in-law sitting in his house, he said nothing. He just nodded, accepting his wife's decision. That night, as they dined together, the merchant looked around and saw something he had never valued before: peace. There were no shouts, no demands, no competition. Just a family sharing what they had, grateful for the little or much that life gave them. And in that moment, he understood he had spent his entire life chasing the wrong thing. If you made it this far, leave me in the comments what you thought of this story, and if you've ever felt that greed made you lose something important. Over time, the merchant recovered. He worked alongside the carpenter, learned the trade, and little by little rebuilt his life. He never saw Salma again, who left with the land manager and left everything behind. And although he lost his fortune, his house, and his pride, the merchant gained something he had never had before: gratitude. He learned to value a plate of food, a bed to sleep in, and the company of people who treated him with respect. He learned that true wealth wasn't in chests of gold or in large mansions, but in having a heart at peace and people who loved you even in your worst moments. And so, the two cousins who were once at opposite extremes of life ended up working side by side, one teaching and the other learning, both grateful for the lessons that life had given them in such different ways. If this story left you with something, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.